That's why I sat here and stand over there. And so I'll be sharing a few questions for us to just engage with as we go through the afternoon. And you can share as you feel inspired to share. So I wanted us to start with just a foundational question. And I was curious to understand, based on your knowledge or your observations within the private sector in Kenya, what types of gender-based violence and harassment do you think occur within the private sector or have an impact on Kenyan workplaces? So types, maybe it could range from inappropriate jokes, it could be sexual comments, it could be online harassment. There are many forms of workplace violence and harassment. So which types have you seen in the workplace?
So I'm glad you've kind of defined violence, because when I saw that, it's like, violence to some of us it's physical, and there is also the emotional and the mental one. I thought that doesn't really happen in the corporate space. So you've widened it to including harassment.
Absolutely.
Which is now some of those things you're mentioning.
Yes. Okay. So it is gender-based violence and harassment. And it's interesting you say that, but even just toxicity can be an experience that people have, and can be violent. It's just not physical.
Yeah,
it can be verbal. So what have you experienced, or what have you seen? It doesn't mean you were the one at the receiving end. Maybe you observed it.
I would say in a corporate discussions in the office, mostly, sorry for men, what I'm going to say, but I would say men, mostly when you're working in the office where maybe we have men in the office, and maybe we have maybe fewer ladies in the office. So men tend to normalize having these inappropriate discussions, especially discussing on how, let's say, physical features of a woman and the dressing code and all that. It does affect most of the women in offices, not just yet. Mostly it affects them mentally because, I don't know. Yeah.
It does. I mean, it can make it uncomfortable to be able to do that. Any other experiences you've observed?
Question. Does it necessarily only have to be at the workplace, or it could be from home and then it's
So that's an interesting question. At the moment, we're talking about just in the workplace. But when you think about, and we'll get to a point where we're talking about the impact, because remember the study that we're doing is on the cost of gender-based violence and harassment to the private sector. If I am getting abused at home, domestic or sexual violence at home, do you think it impacts the private sector? Yeah, it will spill over, right? Because maybe now I'm absent from work because I've got bruises, or I now need to go for medical care. Or maybe I am in the office, but I can't focus. My productivity is affected. There's the thing they say, presenteeism, where you're just there, but you cannot really function. So it will impact productivity. So a lot of organizations look at domestic violence as something that doesn't affect them, but it does. It does. It will filter into the workplace. So in this instance, I was curious about the different forms of harassment or violence that you've encountered in the office. And I want to say something. I know you spoke about men and women. There's a tendency amongst many of us, when we think of gender-based violence, that we have a picture of the perpetrator in mind. And very often that picture of the perpetrator is a male. But the reality is that anyone can be a victim, anyone can be a perpetrator. And because there are different forms, remember, it's not always gender-based. It could be technology-facilitated harassment, like online bullying. It could be sextortion. A woman can bully another woman in the office, or vice versa. It could be a male at the receiving end of it. So there are various forms, and I'm interested in knowing what you have encountered.
Let me ask, is dressing in appropriately in a workplace, a form of harassment in this manner, that maybe when walking to the office, probably because it's on a Friday, dress very strictly, that now you are very uncomfortable working around that lady. Because something that I've encountered severally somewhere, that a lady will think that just because it's on a Friday and month end, so the pocket is a little bit heavy, come to an office dressed like he's going to a swimming pool. And he's seated, that lady, like, for example, is our desk is just opposite our desk. And I don't know what's this with movement, it's up and down, not settled. That will affect you, and you will not be comfortable that day. In fact, your productivity at the end of the day will be zero. You've done nothing because you can't concentrate, definitely. So is that another, is it a form of a sexual harassment or something? Because you are harassed mentally.
And so that's very interesting. In the group that we had in the morning, we had maybe 12 females and 1 male. And Edgar was the second male. And the gentleman in the group brought that up as well and said, look, some women dress in a specific way to attract attention. And it causes men to stumble, let me say, for lack of a better term. And we ended up having a conversation about, do we know anything about the prevalence of gender-based violence in the Muslim community? And here's where I'm going. If they are quite traditional, they will tend to be fully clothed. But we also know for a fact that even in cultures where they only have their eyes exposed, that there is a high amount of gender-based violence and harassment as well. So can we blame it on the dressing? Or can we say the person who then acts on that has an issue? Because why then are these women who are clothed from head to toe, arms included, why are they victims?
I would say that for me, violence is how the victim perceives be violated.
Indeed.
Right? In the sense that if A feels that B's dressing is inappropriate, they are not by the poolside, and I mean A can't function at all clearly, then A's perception of being violated or harassed is real.
It is,
and it differs because C next to A will not have a problem with that situation. As a matter of fact, productivity that day will be full on, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that we need to appreciate that when we are looking at violence, it's how you know, in some cultures, at some levels in the organization, it's easy to be in a meeting where someone will say, "Oh, shut up," or "F off," and if you take issue with that, it might trigger you, the recipient of that comment, and so the person on the other side will be, but we were just talking and it was a robust discussion. Why did you take it personally? So I think the person, the recipient of whatever violence or harassment is right in feeling that.
Yes, and I have to concur with you, because one of the ways that they define whether it's harassment or not is not based on, in your case you're giving the example of a lady who's skimpily dressed, but it's more based on how did I receive it, right? So if I feel that your language that you use is abusive to me, then I am the one who's a victim because I feel abused by your tone and your language or your body language, however it is. It's not about what you intended, because what you intended could be different. The defining factor is how did I receive it, the person who is the victim in the case. So it's an interesting point, and I want us to hold on to that because we're going to get to a point where we're going to discuss what should organizations be doing. Because that to me sounds like a case in point where surely there must be a code of conduct and a dress code. That doesn't, in my view, have to be your responsibility as an individual to tell someone else that, we're not at the beach. There should be a code of conduct. There should be policies and procedures should be there that say, if it's dresses, it should be this business attire, and business attire means no X and Y and Z. Then no one is compromised, right? What other forms of violence or harassment are we seeing in the workplace?
So, not in my workplace. Okay, let me just put a caveat. Whatever I say is not in my workplace.
And that is the case for everyone today.
Yeah. But I personally, the most extreme form of violence I'm aware about that happened to someone close to me was a female getting beaten in the office.
Ooh.
That is the most, I've never, it's the only case I know of my working career, about 25 years, but it did happen for a fact. Something simmering over a long period of time, and then one day it was a man who just beat up the female, and the beating up was punching to the face, to the stomach, female down on the floor, and then stomping on her until the other colleagues got him off. That is the worst case of violence, and this was a subordinate to the female, right? The ones that are commonplace that I have observed are language that's not acceptable, and also, basically that toxic, bullying, corporate bullying, where nothing you do is accepted. So basically, in my experience, that's what is more commonplace. Even when you talk to your friends who have got this manager, nothing I do, I'm now being bullied, things like that.
Yeah. So, that's quite an extreme case, right, of physical violence. And so we'll look at it as that. But I'm sure you have witnessed someone throw something at someone. It doesn't make it any more okay than the physical beating, because remember what we're saying is it's how the victim receives it. So if you threw a ruler at me or whatever it is, for me, I'm now petrified to come to the office, isn't it?
Yeah.
I am being victimized. I am afraid. What are the examples? We were speaking earlier today about the abuse of power or misuse of power. That's another typical example of harassment in the workplace. Yes.
I have witnessed this at a school setting, whereby, how do I say it? So there's this thing, being researchers of gender-based violence, that I have actually seen, whereby men become victims of gender-based violence, but let me give this instance for the case that was given. This woman who was superior to this guy, it was a school setting, slaps the subordinate, that's the teacher. The teacher is male. And now, where I was getting at is, for a man, you cannot react in any formal way. Because one thing about gender-based violence is it's a zero-sum game for the man. If at all you're beaten by a woman, you lose. If you beat the woman, you lose. But then on the other flip side, if at all a woman beats you in a workplace, people will be more sympathetic even to the woman as compared to the man. So now I witnessed that situation where this woman was slapped the teacher, and it was actually in front of students. And it actually ruined the relationship of the teacher with the students. And for me, that has been, as she mentioned about the physical violence, and just clicked. I was not one of the students, I was just around the school at that time. And the teacher didn't react in any way, the teacher didn't quit, they
impacts productivity, and yes, you're talking in a school setting now. But already you're explaining how the relationship between the teacher and students was impacted. I mean, even his quality of output as an educator was probably altered by that experience. And so it does reduce productivity even in that setting, doesn't it?
I've seen one that it was very true but very weird. And some times back in a place that I was working, it wasn't happening. It's the same office that the lady was coming half naked. There was a lady who she was the HR, in fact. She used to sit at the far corner. So for her to get to her desk, she has to pass through. There was like a path at the back. So on that lane where she had to pass through, there were four males that used to sit there. So I don't know what she had an idea. She had something towards one guy that used to sit at the front. So she made sure that she was staffed at the center such that when passing, the male could not push his desk but to get away for her. So the path was narrow. So when she was passing, because she can't pass when you are seated. You had to pull your chair and stand so that she passes. So the path is very narrow. She rubbed her body against that guy when passing. A very subtle kind of, you would tell that there's something happening unless, because what she has done to the first guy, she not do to the second guy. And it's the HR. So you can't even report to the HR.
Yes. And that's an interesting point that you're raising, because it speaks to that issue of the abuse of power, right? So sometimes the perpetrator is the person who's supposed to protect you. And so you have those instances as well, right? It could be abuse of power in the sense that you're being asked for sexual favors to get promotions. I'm sure you've heard of those instances. Or even to just get the job. People go for interviews, and then there's an expectation that they do X or Y so that they can get the job. So that's all abuse of power. And as we go, we'll start to just flesh out what should the private sector be doing to guard against those instances of violence and harassment. I'm just thinking, you didn't get to introduce yourself. Do you want to introduce yourself, your name, surname, your organization, and one interesting fact about yourself?
Good afternoon. My name is Nebucho America. I'm a lawyer. I work with Sophie Salama, and I head of legal affairs and capacity building. Something interesting. Let's see. I started my master's before finishing as a clinical counseling.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. So we're really just having a conversation, exploring the ways in which gender-based violence and harassment shows up in the workplace, and exploring what the private sector is doing in response. So we're sharing a few questions and having conversations as we go along. So before we move on from that, is there anyone else who wanted to add this?
Yeah, I would like to also put in my contributions. I really like the conversation, because one thing I also came to do is also just to learn, because I understand there are people with more experience in the corporate sector, like 25 years, so that's the person I want to learn from. But what I've realized in the short time I've been working, one time I was somewhere, and it comes a time, especially now, the founder would shout at people, verbally abuse people, especially when it reaches end month, when people are supposed to be doing salaries. Salaries are about to come out, and all of a sudden it becomes vulgar, shouting all over the place, saying, you guys, I don't know, there's no money, and you don't even be paid. You have to pay rent, what do you mean? So, I think I really, felt harassed in that, during that time, because, you can communicate well. I think, as leaders, there's a way you can be able to communicate, even if you have a frustration, not to shout at people. Yeah, and I think that will even suppress people, their emotions, how you're working. And I mean, the tension will be so much heightened during that time of the month.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it doesn't have to be so tense like that. Then I think another harassment that I don't know if you guys might find it as harassment, but I think sometimes in the workplace there is that place of lack of confidentiality, where there's something we can talk about right now with someone, and then this person goes and tells now the person who is, in charge of something, and maybe, talks about you, the boss. They betray you literally. So I think it harasses someone at a place where, and I believe, for me, I believe in a workplace there should be some level of trust. But then if you can discuss something, even maybe an area of improvement, then you go and mention someone, and then that person comes and again bashes on you or tries to start now to punish you in some way. I think so to some extent it's an harassment. Another one now looking even at the legal perspective, but I think maybe you would agree with me, is there's this pressure sometimes in the corporate to deliver with impossible timelines, where you now get people to work over the weekends. People come with no compensation. People are not taking leave. We've never even given leave days, off days to people, and this is something that is even mandated by the law. So I believe such, and even when you just even calling me off work hours, you can't call me at night. I mean, there are work hours you're supposed to call. So I find that sometimes can be, and you're demanding that I should pick. If I don't pick, you're calling 5 times. And I work with such a person. Yes, it's something we need to deliver, but and deliver within but that pressure in the corporate sometimes to deliver with impossible timelines. So it makes people to work overboard with no compensation for the weekends, for the leave days, for the extra hours of work. So I think also for me, on my end, that would also amount to harassment.
It's an interesting point, and I think, when I mentioned technology facilitated harassment earlier, and in a subtle way, that's one of those. Where they now, if it started or accelerated because of the issue of remote work, where now there seems to be an expectation that you are on email 365 days a year. That you are responding to work communication around the clock. There was a time back in the day, I think you will remember, when WhatsApp, it was inappropriate to communicate via WhatsApp on work issues. But that boundary has been completely demolished. And now, WhatsApp, it's like it's owned by the company. Okay? And we are receiving, literally it's affecting people's sleep patterns, especially if you're working with clients or in organizations where you're working across time zones. The amount of fatigue it causes, so I agree with you that can be a form of harassment. The issue of lack of confidentiality, I wanted to share an example that was shared by someone in the earlier session of how they were a whistleblower. And then the person that they whistle blew on phoned them to say, but you went and said X. So it's that issue of confidentiality, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why people may not feel comfortable within private sector or within organizations to report. Because you can have that fear of retaliation. You can be afraid that you will end up being the one fired because you've reported something, and rightfully so. Right? So I think we could move on from this and yeah.
Just one last thing. As context, I was an educator, so I used to go to different centers. And in one specific center, I witnessed something a little bit disturbing. That was the cooks. One time, the cook had to give birth, so they took a maternity leave. But then when they came back, they had already been fired. So now, from that instance, any other cook who got pregnant and was going to give birth had to keep it so much in her wraps. I remember this one instance, I think it was last year actually, whereby the cook gave birth today and then was at work tomorrow. And still, even the day before she gave birth, she was still at the workplace. So today I'm at the workplace, they give birth tomorrow, and the day after I am at the workplace. but I just tell one or two people, and it's kept so much in the wraps because I'm sure the boss finds out I am off around time. And what was disturbing was that the boss was on action. So I felt as if it was the role of the boss to also supervise his staff, understanding what it is like to take care of a child. But now, for me, I was told that I just had to keep it to myself. It was like, they just went to really congratulating her, but then they're like, she can't do anything about it.
Literally, you see that when even is a provision by the law that you know everyone needs a maternal leave for 21 days. But to realize such a case, even there is a time where I knew someone, they would not take leave days because they would think when once they take them, they will come back and they get someone else who are doing their job. But they're being threatened. People are looking for job all over Kenya. So if you do not want this job, don't come. Yeah, so such kind of threats and harassment.
And look, it plays out in different ways, right? Have you never encountered people who say they will not hire women who are of childbearing age? That is.
I've actually had an experience like I was interviewing for a position, and one of my mentors told me to remove any indicator of my age, because he's able any social media or anything that shows my age, because the organization apparently the value is ages. They would and he said not specifically. They used to him they say usionekane kama uko dukani unajifungua because they will not take it.
What does that mean?
It means you should not let them know that you're of childbearing age because they will reject you if you're very qualified. And that actually happened because when I showed up for the interview didn't even happen. They told me you're too young, they'll probably get married after 6 months. In the position. They were very frank. I was actually shocked that they were forward with that. And they say they will not waste your time, so just go come back when you're much better when you're done with your child test.
But that also transcends childbearing, because now you see there's that issue of you are childbearing age, and then they will look at you and say, you are too old.
You are too experienced.
Yes, and really what they're saying is, this is an old person who will be able to push, they need to extend themselves. So those biases just span the whole spectrum of your work service. Like if someone really wants to pick an issue, they can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
One more thing. I just wanted to talk about sexual harassment. About another person who was in the audience. The person is attached, just a new attachee. And these people who are in power tend to take advantage of their positions. So when you're new in the office, not just like a chief, just someone new in the office, they get to because I'll put the experience of this person. She went to this office, worked there for like a week, and then the boss called. This does not occur only on females, it does also to the guys also. So the person was called in the office, and the talk, the sweet talk, and all that. But now the boss opened the drawer, showed the lady some cash, and she was like, if you want to maintain your position, or if you want to be employed, let's say permanently, you have to do this and this with me outside the office for me to help you get to that position. And once the lady refused, her attachment had to be cancelled. So you have to leave the premises because you did not follow whatever the boss wanted to do.
Yeah.
So this one happens, I would say, to most of the people, and they prefer not to talk about it because it affects them mentally.
Absolutely. And one of the main reasons why you end up with these scenarios is the power imbalance. And this is the saddest reality. I mean, you were talking about the example of the HR manager. Very often, the culprits are people in authority, which is really highly unfortunate. And so when we think about the way we structure our organizations and the way you lay out your organogram, those are things to really consider. because we often find ourselves on the reactive end of the spectrum, now trying to deal with issues that have already taken place. Whereas if we were proactive, we might have considered what does it mean when you're bringing an intern and assigning this intern to the director of finance, who is male and she is a young female, or vice versa. I mean, these things are not rocket science, actually, especially for many of us who have had years of work experience. If you cast your memory back, you will remember when it was you who was having those awkward advances from people in power, right? And so we should be doing more to proactively protect those that come after us. So I wanted us to move on to discussing the issue of workplace safety, and specifically considering how safe and respected do you feel in your current work environment? Or how safe do you feel your current work environment is for others? Are they respected? And what do you think contributes to feelings of safety or the lack thereof? So if you were to say the work environment is safe, what are those things that have been put in place that make you believe that? And what are those things that are not being done that you think should be done to improve safety within the workplace? We were speaking earlier on about some work cultures, like the toxicity, right, that can heighten feelings of discomfort, of not being safe. No, I mean, there are many people in the world who wake up and wish they didn't have to go to work. What are those reasons?
Mondays.
Eh?
Mondays are hectic. Mondays that they are frowning in the morning.
Specifically for my workplace, that's in Salama, and I'd say mostly thanks to our legal team, we have a lot of policies around this because we deal with a lot of cases of gender-based violence. And I'll talk about personally, there's so much that I've actually had to learn about even dealing with survivors of gender-based violence and having something we call empathy mapping about how do you deal with somebody who's a survivor. Things that I technically would never have learned. And this is because of the policies and the trainings that we have set in place. There's something that we keep on saying that if at all you don't have these people in the room and you're maybe building something or building a feature for our platform, then you're not building a feature for them, you're building one against them. It's basically a part of the co-creation. So you have to include everybody, even if you're formulating the policies, to make sure that everybody is heard and everybody feels safe in that environment, especially based on the cases that we do.
So I think you've touched on the issue of policies, and we'll get to it soon. But very often I think organizations do have policies. It's not the absence of policies that's the issue. It's the absence of implementation. So often those policies are there, but do people know about them? Do people know if this happens to me, this is the channel that I have to take, this is where I need to go?
One more class for this. So normally what people say are mostly is the framework, like you say. And while designing our internal frameworks, which no one person has the final say, assuming a conflict is raised, the director is not the only person who can carry it out or mitigate it, such that every such
which is great. And for the two of you, it's interesting because I think your level of understanding of this subject area will be different from many people. So you're talking very much about the survivor-centered approach, which many organizations don't really pay attention to. But that segregation of duties, absolutely important. Because where your only recourse is HR, like you said, and yet you know HR is the culprit, do you feel like you can go and replace? You feel you have no option, right? So it's important to have that division of responsibilities. And so one of the things that we speak about in our training is actually the importance of having focal points, which is within the organization, a group or team of people who are responsible for addressing, receiving complaints and escalating and elevating. But that group of people has to mirror the demographics of the organization in terms of race, in terms of seniority or the hierarchy, in terms of job positions, so that if I am the victim, I don't have to go to the director of HR. I can go to someone who's on the shop floor with me, who I know will understand what I say, who's probably had that experience, but they have undergone the training that will help them to know how to help me escalate my situation. So what else can we be doing to make our workplaces feel more safe?
I think they should they should give people a room for improvement, or also maybe more training, especially, I would say, of personal experience. I worked in such an organization as an accountant, so they introduce new system every time. But now, let's say you get trained once, and then maybe your senior gives you something to do. You know, we are all human beings, you can forget something because of that training. So when you're working on something, and then maybe you do a mistake, instead of a person coming and attacking you, they should give you that room for improvement, give you more training regarding that. But instead of doing that, you get attacked. So you become demoralized, especially when it comes to your work and all that, because mentally it affects you mentally. So you start thinking, maybe am I stupid or something? So they should give people room for improvement.
Yeah.
So much.
It's true. I mean, not many organizations leave room for mistakes. And so you find that people who do make mistakes get so occupied trying to cover up for that mistake rather than for it to be a learning point, an opportunity to know to do better in the next instance. And so that culture that says mistakes are not tolerated often doesn't produce, it's not good for productivity. So I think that's a very good point as well. So let's talk about that organizational culture. Do you believe that organizations within the Kenyan private sector have a culture that tolerates or condones gender-based violence and harassment? Can you share more? Why do you feel this way?
I use an example of Philippines. It's generally accepted. It's actually considered part of process, to prepare you for the reality of the profession. You come in as an intern, you go on people, and when you get you came in to be trained to be a lawyer, but the harassment begins from the very job description. You'll find interns running errands for the people masters. They will pick your kids from school, they will wash your car, and it's completely considered acceptable. And if you ask for the clean the tool, everybody wants to do that. Then the sexual harassment, that was required. Again, it's considered you're being welcomed now. You're being welcomed to the profession. So there's bullying in all sorts, in all shapes and forms. However, you can think of it physical, psychological, even financial sometimes. There's some places you go to, you pay them to intern with them. And again, it's considered, that's welcome to the profession, that's how it's done. For non-law firms that have experience, again, it's exactly the same, does not matter which industry. extreme cases where it's actually trafficking. Because you'll find, this one actually happened 5 months ago. She was interning at a law firm. So the boss was passing her around his friends for sexual exploitation.
Wow.
Yes, and she could not say no because she will get dismissed from the farm. And if she seeks to start her life and she can get the farm, they will require a referral or a recommendation, or they will still hold the old workplace. And that person was very clear, I will write what I write, and his words are not in the industry. So she betrayed her to be. It was actually 5 people. So you look for her sometimes, you hear she's in Zanzibar, she's in whatever, but she's on vacation. She's been, the boss has said that I have to go to this. They actually had to do it. And again, she cannot complain anywhere because she tried complaining and she was told you absolutely have no choice. Either you change career or just stick with it for 6 months, get your letter and leave. Yeah.
So I've got some thoughts about that situation, and maybe just clarity. At what point, we are talking about gender-based violence, at what point does the victim or the subject of that gender-based violence then take responsibility for what is happening? You know, because it's all well to say this is a violent situation, and in the workplace I can't, let's take sexual harassment. I think in the workplace, sexual harassment and bullying, you know, those are commonplace, even in some of our blue chip companies. So at what point are you supposed to say as the individual that, you know, you unless you are not aware you are a victim of violence, at what point are you supposed to stand up and say, you know what, guy, let it be?
Yeah.
So because then we are going to get caught up in a situation, like for example, I'll give an example. I'm aware of a situation, and when I say I'm aware now, this one personally aware because I handled it in my official capacity, where there was a team building, and after the team building, a female staff, you know, went off with one of the managers, right? We got into an Uber and went to a facility, and when she was there, she changed her mind. You can change your mind at whatever,
Yes.
you know. And fortunately, it didn't escalate beyond that. She was able to get out of that situation, go home, but on Monday she reported that, you know, she was almost sexually assaulted, right? And then in the course of finding out, okay, exactly what happened here, you know, it was this, even last time we had gone for this camp, you know, there was another manager. Then we started picking there is a pattern. And we are not blaming the victim, but there is a pattern. And on further, and that does not negate that, yes, she was violated. And on further interrogation, unfortunately, she had been sexually assaulted elsewhere, and she kind of like carried that on, and, you know, she was susceptible to those kind of situations. So at that point, in as much as action was taken against the managers, you know, in question, there was also her own issue of how can you then, you know, if this is what, why is it you?
Yeah.
Can we help you so that you are not attracting or you're not finding yourself in those positions? So, and I know that is very dicey because you are sort of like blaming the victim, which should not be the case, but then also, like in your case, this whole wakili who's being, you know, passed around, surely, at some point you should be able to say, Hakimi, I'm going to go to Roye. Sounds like an clothes.
Look, I think you raise a valid point, and I think that's why the issue of victim blaming and victim shaming is such a challenge. Because sometimes you look at the scenario and you think, how could could you not get out of this situation? But in the same breath, let's talk about domestic and sexual violence. There are a lot of married women who are in very physically and emotionally abusive relationships. And one of the things that we cover in our training is, why does the victim not leave? And it's a whole deep psychological issue where they actually are trapped and need psychological support to get to the point where they are able to take back some power and make decisions on their own part. So very often you find that a victim will be a victim repeatedly. It could have even started from child abuse. So we can never really know the full story of an individual and how they end up finding themselves in those circumstances. But the reality is that if there is a perpetrator, the perpetrator should also know better. So in terms of private sector, the survivor-centered approach actually looks at both the victim and the perpetrator. And they should all receive survivor-centered care. Because even that perpetrator has issues. Just because the woman is naked in front of you doesn't mean, would you do it? Would you, because she's naked? I think a lot of men would still be like, no, I'm not going to go for it because that's just not how you're wired. But if you're wired that way, you also already have issues that need attention and that you need help with. And so when it comes to private sector responses, we need to be looking at both ends of the spectrum. And it's a very difficult thing to do because really what you want to do is to just kick the perpetrator out. But that means they just move on to the next organization to find new victims.
I think what she's talking about is less of victim blaming and more of pinpointing exactly where the victim became, I don't want to use contributor, but let's use it as a placeholder. At what point in the abuse or in the dynamic, because it's a balance of power. At what point did the victim start making decisions, or it's subconscious? At what point do they start making decisions that are actually contributing to their own abuse? It's not their fault, it's still the perpetrator's fault, but the situations that you keep putting yourself in that will make it much easier for you to be a victim. And if that can be addressed, if that person moves to this organization, that is the only way you'll be sure in the next organization they will still not keep putting themselves in harm's way.
Yeah.
Which again is very touchy because you have to really interrogate the situation from one point A to point B, and you say you never know what it's like. But if we can create clear contexts in the workplace, this is when this started, it was with this person and this person in this context, and you really have your growth points very clearly. You can be able to identify when it happened and at what point the victim gave up and became complacent. Especially when there's power balance, the victims tend to become complacent. Like, if I collaborate or if I give in, maybe it will be less, and I feel like I have authority and have to choose. Then at that point is when you maybe know what to do with the situation. You can mitigate or eradicate if it's extreme. But then we have to be very careful with the approach we take so that we don't end up blaming the victim and grouping them together with the perpetrators.
Absolutely. But also importantly, I think what I was trying to cite is that very often in organizations, even those focal points, or even the HR manager, if they are responsible for that, they have a level of experience that does not include being a psychologist. So that depth of interrogation or trying to assist the survivor, we need to be cautious of knowing our limitations. And so, in the earlier group, we were talking about the importance of actually private sector having company therapists, someone who is qualified to do that deeper work. Because I'm not a psychologist. And so sometimes you can end up doing more harm in the process of trying to clear.
I totally agree, and just to go back to your earlier point, what private sector can do. So when I look at most corporates that I would say I know something about, it starts at policy level, right? That's what we sexual harassment policy, which is a legal requirement, right? We have a fraternization policy, you know, we have a mentorship policy, and looking at, you know, things like, for example, this mentor, how are you pairing up mentors and mentees? And that is catered for in the policy. That you should not pair probably, you know, an elderly gentleman, or, you know, just there, a man who is with a young, you know, I mean, is it that you don't have women managers to pair these young girls with?
Yeah.
Because then you're also putting both of them in an awkward situation, right? Having said that, so policy is number one for us in the group I work for. Whistleblowing mechanisms, which are internal, but we also recognize that again the perpetrator might be the very person who are supposed to be whistleblowing. So we have an external whistleblowing facility run out of South Africa, and what it's run by Deloitte, it's called Deloitte Anonymous. And what HR does is to publicize that these are the whistleblowing numbers. The telephone numbers are toll-free. It's an 800 number. You can write an email. You can say what you want to say through that facility. So what that helps us with is that, so that the reports are received by the vendor in South Africa. In the raw form, the vendor scrubs the report for any identifiable, you know, you could say, my name is Margaret, I'm having a problem with Jack in the office. So the work of Tip of Anonymous is to scrub the report, then send that report back to the company. In my group, it is received by 2 individuals at the very top. One of them being the chairman of the company is out of the system, right? And this enables that if the report is talking about whatever the areas we are speaking about, then, you know, some of them might touch on the CEO. So if it's the chairman, then, you know, that's the highest you go. And what the vendor has advised is that if they do get a report in respect of the chairman himself, and that other one individual, that report will not go to either of them. So they look for another avenue. So we have found that that helps, because most of the reports we get through, people in this part of the world are very shy. Okay, let me not say shy. People don't want to be troublemakers, and they don't want complications. So rather than me going to talk to my manager about a situation that might go against me, I would rather just do an email. The third thing we have found that works is when people know that action is being taken. So you've got policy, you've got that anonymous feedback place, but also for people to know, okay, so, and people will know about these things. If you have a manager who's, you know, being funny, harassing people or being abusive, it's not one person most of the time. It's spread across. So people know this manager. So when they see action is taken, it encourages people. So I think in private, corporate, the corporate space, most of us have those policies because they are required, right? Either legally or by a regulator or whatever. I think when we fail is in the execution of it. Absolutely. So you could be receiving these anonymous reports, but you look at them, you're like, what? Hey, this person is handling our big project for 2025. Because the person reporting is now this big girl, this secretary is sure what is this? So we fail in the execution of this.
That's brilliant. So I'll let you continue. You've gone right through a lot of the questions that we're going to ask. So as we are continuing, we're going to skip what we've already covered and add to what she might not have mentioned. Edgar.
Yes, I can add something. In Kenya, especially the workspaces, in some corporates before, the language that exists. Because if I intern and you get that your boss is talking to another employee, like maybe say the physical appearance of a lady is like this, you know, it has also created a sense of sexual. There are a lot of sexual jokes that have now been so normalized
Yes.
in places of work that has created an impression in the mindset of our staff members that is also in the rising.
Yes.
That is also affecting a lot of some behaviors that are in workplaces because people are coming there and say, okay, if this is how my boss can talk, okay. So this thing is normal. So people have now started normalizing through just the language, the communication that exists at the workplaces.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think some clear guidelines need to be placed on now workspaces, some specific language needs to be used. Yeah.
But then I have a question on that specific language. You know, you might be working in a company where the boss comes, for example, from another country where a language that would feel like it's abusive to you,
Yes.
to them, it's normal language. And he keeps on using that language to you. Then does that now amount to harassment? Because to him it's very normal because where he comes from,
Yes.
that's how because I once worked in a company where the boss could not, every minute, you could count the number of times he's using the F word on
Yeah.
people. And that was the norm. But then to you it's an insult.
Yes.
And that's some other word that I would not like to mention because it's very abusive. But to him, it's from Northern Ireland, and Northern Ireland, that's the normal language. That's the normal language. So at what point does it become an abuse? Because to him, it's
Can
okay.
I respond to that? Remember we said the issue is how you are receiving it. So if you are being offended by it or triggered by it, then it is abuse and does need to be addressed. But again, we need to have the right mechanisms in place within the organization for that to be tabled, to say, look, respectfully, you think it's okay. But for us culturally, because that's often what it is, for me, it's not okay to use that language. I'll give another example, and this is something that happens fairly often in South Africa, in certain parts of South Africa. You know, the Afrikaners really abused black people in South Africa. And so sometimes you'll find that in a business meeting, they can just digress and start speaking in Afrikaans. It's not intended by them as abuse. But to me, we're here in a business meeting. You know I can't speak that language. I feel abused, right? And so we need to have those mechanisms to be able to address it. Because it's not, for them, it's not always that they intend it, they don't recognize it. And maybe we also do it, perhaps, when we are amongst ourselves and going to the lake. But surely if it's flagged, then you want to accommodate the other person, right? So it can be regarded as abuse in short.
Can I just say something about that as well? In this part of the world, we as Africans are very accepting to foreigners, and I'll say, white foreigners, brown foreigners. We are very accommodating. That is, we don't want to offend. So we're in a meeting and we use the F word and we say, oh, it's cultural, and there's nothing cultural about that. Disrespect is disrespecting whatever culture. And most of these things that are sanitized as being cultural is just someone's poor upbringing and socialization. They would not use that language in their own organization. And I've worked with such an individual who was, and unfortunately, and I'll just, you get the white people coming to work in this part of the world, and already they are coming with preconceived ideas of, these people don't work, they're lazy, they are thieves, you must push them, that kind of thing. So if that's your mindset, you come to a meeting and things are not going okay, you find yourself, using words you should not be using in a corporate setting. So it depends, is there a HR, for example, in that organization who's able to stand up for the people and say, manager so and so, you are using this. Of course, they'll go behind culture and say, you guys are too sensitive. Then go work in your culture where you are money there. When you come to this culture, when you come to do what the room must that proactive and have people around the table who can call out that behavior. And in our case, where that happened, and I beg to differ, sometimes I don't think they don't know they're offending. They know they're offending because in their minds, you guys, what do you know? You know, you're black. You know, I'm here now to tell you how it's done. So if you call out that, and it stopped, to be honest, it stopped. The person hid behind that culture, oh sorry, you know, you guys are very sensitive, I'm very sorry. But it stopped. So call it out.
Yes.
I'm thinking, you see, this was the topmost guy. He was the chairman of the company. It's his company. And it's the same company where we had the HR rubbing against our guy. And the same company where a lady was coming up dressed. It's the same company.
It was a problematic company.
So now, this mechanism that we are saying that for feedback mechanism, you see the feedback will come to him of such cases of sexual harassment.
Yes.
And he probably have a say on whether this is an harassment or not because it's his company. So now here it's like not what we are saying that if you can't fit to a culture, go back to your place. Now it becomes that if you can't fit here, go back to where you came from. And once you leave, that does not mean that that place is still safe for those that you have left behind and those that will be coming. So what do you do in such a scenario?
Shortly, Jordan, for me, it's awareness. Our staff are aware that they can make noise at multiple forums. You see what you're saying, if that's the chairman's behavior, the chairman might be the founder, but he's also got other board members. I can tell you in my group, we have had internal whistleblowing going to the full board. And they were not whistleblowing against the chairman, it was against the man. In fact, the directors were like, you guys are not managing this because why is it getting to us? And in the country, we find cases where internal scandals like that then go outside to the media, start making them up in social media.
Yeah.
So if the staff are aware that the back really doesn't stop with that seemingly the top guy and they can go elsewhere for it.
Yeah, I'd like to concur. It was a conversation that came up in the earlier discussion as well. That sometimes this is where we get to benefit from the Gen Zs, where they were giving an example of a scenario similar to yours, where there was no recourse. And so they then managed to bypass and go to a former chairman, one who had actually left. And this former chairman is the one who then addressed it with the current CEO. And it was just a conversation to say, we have received these reports. And he then opted to leave himself because now already the Gen Zs, Gen Ys were busy. And reputationally, he couldn't wait to let that play out. So he had to opt to leave himself. So there's not always going to be a surefire way. But I think what we're trying to say is within private sector, we need to do our best to ensure that there are multiple mechanisms to try and allow for those different options where it feels like it's a blocked scene. And one of the examples we were sharing sometimes for small organizations where it's a team of 8, so you can't really report, when you're all in the same building. Where you have those HR business advisors, sometimes that helps. Or using an external service provider to handle that as a third-party service provider to handle it.
Yeah, so just maybe to add on what you're saying, I think what she said about now an external service provider, having a vendor and stuff. I think for us, let's face it, I think a very young team. And we've had to, think of ways we can be able to make how we're working safe. And other things we've done is, as a startup, as young people are still trying to build, you may not have, for example, even the money to outsource such kind of service from a vendor. So what we've done, we are part of a consortium, it's called the Well-Being Project. So where organizations around the world, they meet together, they discuss around how can we be able to make such spaces safe. So for those who are in Kenya, we've done what we call accountability groups. So for example, there's a group we are in where we are 3 organizations where we are just checking each other and benchmarking. How have you done it? How have we more than about the profits, more than about the money and the results. Is about, do we have a whole person? You see. So also, apart from the thriving business, we have thriving people. So that's how we've done it. And I mean, the organizations that are ahead of us, and they're doing good stuff that we are learning from them. One of them, recently they implemented in their office space, they have a wellness room. You know, in terms of like wellness, they're so into it, in terms of the mental health and how to create such a safe space for people. And I think also that one can work because I think partnership is in different ways. So you can partner for accountability. As you're still building muscle to be able to outsource, you can partner for accountability where you're checking each other, you are benchmarking with each other to be able to make the space more comfortable for the people. Yeah.
I like the idea. Someone was talking about peer reviews earlier on, which is a similar sort of idea. That's great. So, I don't know how our time is doing. What is our time at the moment? Anybody?
43.
Okay, so we're still okay. The next question that I wanted to ask about is the issue of comfort in reporting, and I feel like I'm getting some of the sentiment already. We wanted to get a sense of, do people feel comfortable reporting instances of gender-based violence and harassment that take place at the workplace? And you are citing an example of, no, you feel terribly uncomfortable and you feel like there's no recourse. So the question then is, what are the reasons that encourage or discourage you from reporting? Or that discourage people from reporting within the workplace?
Let me give you an example. Another place where I was, there was a suggestion box. A box where you drop your issues. Unknowing to us, the guys had installed a camera far away where you would not see where the camera is picking you. And so the camera was for, if they get a suggestion, they get something fishy, and they want to know who dropped it, they go back to the camera and check. So guys would become like, even if I drop at night, they still know it's me. Even if I go and print so that they don't get my handwriting, I'll still be called secretly and told, now give us the gist of this story. So that's one way and how people are discouraged from giving feedback, because the organization still come back to you.
So it's the fear of retaliation.
Yes.
Anything else that prevents people or discourages people from reporting? And I think you mentioned something earlier on around sometimes people don't bother because they've seen those who reported and they've seen what happened to them. Or they've seen that people reported and nothing was done. Where it feels like it's just pointless.
I feel for things that happen in the workplace, the number one concern is usually job security. Because you might be the victim, yes, the organization knows and wants it, but then sometimes an issue can be considered too much for the organization. It's easier for them to dismiss you than actually have to address it. And they will justify that if you moved you from the situation that was putting you at risk. So job security, the retaliation is usually the job. So somebody says it's just 9 to 5, let me say it is 9 to 5, and go home after that. If you can, the frameworks need to, that's why confidentiality is a very, very big factor. What they're doing is very interesting about third parties, because anonymity will, at least, even if they want to do something, you'll be sure at least you won't lose your job because you're a victim.
Okay.
There's also, there's also confidentiality.
Yes, and there's something that you said that made me actually write lack of confidentiality.
Wow.
And it reminded me of the lady who was saying the person she had whistle blown on. They informed her to say, but why are you whistle blowing? So it's that, right? Because you didn't feel unsafe again.
Yeah. Because in this situation, it's whereby even when you report this to the HR, the information will still maybe even just like linked to the company. And then I have seen this situation, especially the man reported about this, and then you know, the jokes that will not happen, which is now tantamount to bullying. They'll be like, why did you go and talk about this? I'll use the Swahili word that they actually say, unapigwa na mwanamke. Basically that means why you being beaten, why you agreeing to be beaten by a woman. Because that information was able to, it might have happened in private or maybe within an office that nobody else was able to access that. But because the information was just like leaked to just like the team members, that becomes an issue. And it's, the primary reason is confidentiality. Now, even the people who are actually perpetrating this or actually bullying this person, they know that if someone go report, it will still come back to us the way that he reported that it was leaked to us in this incident. So they'll never really go ahead and actually do that.
I think you were sharing an example earlier on of that people want to see that action is being taken. But even in the way that it should be managed, it should be stating that this was what was, the crime that was committed, or whatever the perpetrator did, but without names. And then also saying what the penalty was, but without mentioning who the victim was or who the perpetrator was, because that issue of confidentiality is important all around.
So how we manage that, for example, not many cases, but in the few, if a report is made, it will be investigated.
Yes.
And we don't investigate with a view to finding you on the wrong. It would also be to indicate you. There will be many factors at play. So, personally, from my experience, is you find that the perpetrator, this is not their first time, it is our open secret. For the ones in Kenya, it's like that case of the Alliance high school teacher, where a teacher was said to have been molesting girls for over 20 years, and everyone knew about it, but nothing was being done. So that happens a lot in corporate, so that, for example, one goes round. If someone has reported, and then someone is asked to take off for a week, 2 weeks, to allow for the matter to be looked into, to allow for the investigations to be carried out, more often than not you will find one going around, Patikana has been caught, or it has come to a head. So even without the need of having to mention names and things like that, people are like, okay, so people are listening, people are being heard. I have a controversial reason why sometimes people don't disclose gender-based violence. It's controversial because, okay, this is what it is. Sometimes if the victim is benefiting indirectly or directly, they choose not to report it. I'll give a case of where you have a senior manager who is acting inappropriately towards a female junior staff, and this is, it's not coerced. It's just that I will send you inappropriate text. I will forward inappropriate, forwards to you on phone. I will compliment you in a way that is inappropriate in the workplace. And the lady decides, okay, I'm uncomfortable, I'm married, and I don't want to be this space. But they are not fearing victimization, right? But at the same time, she knows that if she writes to the manager and says, hey, I'm taking Friday off, that Friday is going to be granted and you don't lock it in. If you say, so there are small perks that come with you allowing that kind of harassment, right? So sometimes people don't report because of that. So they are victims, and when you talk to them, they'll be very upset about it. Why does he do this? And you ask the person, why aren't you reporting? And then the person says, no, I don't create a big deal and everything. But then you also know that the person is benefiting indirectly.
So the victims differentiate themselves.
Sorry?
The victims differentiate themselves. I'm very uncomfortable, but they can get a bit of that sometimes.
You spoke about something that made me think of an issue, which you were saying how when the investigation, because it always has to go through investigation, the difference investigation or informal investigation, and there are differences. But the one thing that I wanted to say is that, quite rightly so, it's not always to find blame. And so sometimes you have false accusations in organizations. And so that's why that survivor-centered approach has to apply to both the victim and the perpetrator. But because you may find after investigation that the perpetrator is actually the victim,
Yeah.
where the person who reported initially is the one who's trying to get something out of the person they are accusing.
And sometimes, let me add that when you investigate, there are some violations that don't end at corporate.
That don't?
End at the corporate level.
Oh yes.
Like, for example, in that case where that intern said there were two managers who tried to assault her, or one took her to a place and she was able to get away. The advice was, okay, as a corporate, we are taking action, and actually the manager was dismissed because he didn't deny that happened. He said it was consensual until and he respected her when she said no, but it was too late. But we also advised the lady, if you feel you want to lodge an attempted assault case with the police, you need to seek independent legal advice, and that's a recourse that's open for you. So that as an employer, then you cannot be said that we harshly, and then she goes and now it even becomes it was an issue against the company, allow that kind of situation. So there are some investigations that don't end up at the corporate entity.
Yes, you're quite right. And that will vary by country because it tends to be legislated. What type of offences, and often sexual offences, are ones that have to go the criminal route. And so it's important, even as the victim reports, that you make it clear to them what their options are, including their right to confidentiality, because where it's a criminal one, they need to know from the onset that this will no longer be confidential.
Just to maybe make a comment to what you just said, there's something that I have noticed with dealing with survivors. This was a case that I was dealing with about 2 weeks ago, whereby now once you actually now proceed over to legalities and the police, sometimes we have a problem with our legal system. I pointed it out to my team whereby this person, it was a guy who was chopped, some baby. And once they went to report to the police were like, these are home issues, you just go deal with them. So the police never did take reports when, say, men report it, but then when a woman reports it, it's sometimes taken to be a little bit more serious. So maybe understanding this, even in the corporate sense, maybe the company should also try to support in terms of maybe making sure that these cases actually followed up. Because if at all you go with it individually, cops specifically in Kenya, they'll always want something small to make sure that your case just goes a little bit faster.
And it goes for women too, because I think a lot of women who go to the police station to report that they are being abused in the home, usually the question is, what did you do? Go and speak to your husband nicely. So I think we are plagued by issues of our races, our cultures, our religions, all of which make us see this through a lens where we have normalized behavior that's inappropriate. Okay, so moving on, we spoke about policies and we said that all or most companies have policies in place to address this issue. So my question then is, are people within organizations aware of those policies? Do they know what to do? Are they effective? Do they trust the mechanisms that we have in place? Yeah.
That is quite a question of capacity building, because you cannot ask somebody to trust a policy or a framework based on a policy if they're not aware it exists. So the first point of contact has to be awareness. You are actually legally required to inform policy designing, like we call it job design. Like she said, if you've handled a matter internally and then you advise the victim to proceed to take criminal action against the perpetrator, usually you arrive at that conclusion because you gather evidence and you have all this information that led you to conclude that this person was guilty and dismiss them and advise the victim to, it's in the best interest to proceed to criminal matters. But then if you abandon the victim after that, saying you've reported to the state, it's now a matter of the state, you really need to solve the issue because, again, while they're doing investigations outside, they will need the company to support them by providing this, we call it discovery, the evidence that they gather that allow them to conclude that this person should be dismissed for this and this. If that can be included in the policy of the company, the whistleblowing policy, then it will inspire trust within the remaining personnel in the company that the organization, if something happens to me within the organization will support me through to the end of it. Support does not have to be financial. If you give them that discovery alone, it will build their case. So if that becomes part of your policy, again, it circles back to trust. And that can only be availed through evaluations and whatnot, so it ends up being that cycle. But you have to start at informing people of what you have going on.
Okay. I like the point that you raised about how support doesn't necessarily always have to be financial. It could be access to resources, and supporting in different ways.
I would say most of the companies, actually all companies, policies are there. People know about the policy, but they tend to ignore it. Reason being, there's a certain behavior that maybe has been normalized in an organization. And for certain behavior to be normalized, it always starts from the top. So let's say when the head is behaving in has a certain kind of a fishy character, that the person directly shows it to the juniors, they'll copy it. And maybe, according to whatever, let's say the organization policy, it's wrong. But now you see your senior is doing it. So you also tend to normalize it. And if maybe the organization does not follow the right procedure on how to stop such kind of behavior, it will grow. And once something grows and, let's say a plant, planted something, the roots will grow, the plant will grow. So if they don't be strict on following those policies, this thing will continue.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I'm intrigued by you saying that people are aware of policies. I feel like they may be, but there's a tendency for the policy to be what a person signs when they fill in their contract and then it sits in a shop.
Yeah.
When it comes to the reality of I've had an incident, I don't know if people know what they then should do. They probably know what the do's and don'ts are, but they don't know what the mechanisms are to support them. What are your thoughts on that?
To that end, one of the things that we have noticed is that every employee, as they may be on board, there needs to be an orientation. It's not like you're on board and then the work starts immediately. I feel that it's okay to go through different policies. We deal with a lot of gender-based violence cases, and on top of that, we realize that you also need to orient people on other policies, say about disability and inclusivity. But this needs to be an actual intentional orientation. I think one of us actually mentioned about that. And it being intentional, that means that the company has that culture itself. Because the thing about you being given a policy and just signing, sometimes you don't even read through it. You're just like, yes, there are documents that I need to sign, I've already gotten a job, when does the work start? But I feel maybe it could take the first 2 or 3 days to make people understand the company culture. Because during this period, that's when they actually learn about the reporting mechanisms. You actually even can do the role playing, and these will actually enable people to, because they have participated in it, they'll be able to understand that this is the process. And even during the role playing, even the perpetrators will understand that there are consequences, and this is how abuse looks like. As you're saying, it should come from how the survivor feels about, say, abuse. Now, even the perpetrator, say somebody who's actually dressed in a certain way, you say, well, no, yeah, because we will play this as we are starting, if at all I ever do something to this structure, this is tantamount to, let's say, abuse, and I shouldn't do this. Because they participated in it, they can't continue doing it.
So are you clear on what the reporting procedures are? You've shared yours. For others, are you clear of what the reporting procedures are in your organizations?
Let me speak on that. When you talk of policies, a policy is essentially a guideline. What we meant, practical application to a policy is the implementation framework. Let me use an example. The way your organization is doing, what the organization is doing, they have this no harassment policy, the guideline, you know what not to do. But people will still do it. So the question then becomes, if somebody is aware and they decide not to do what they're supposed to do, what's next? What are the action points? That is, we have somebody external who will not be biased or does not know you to handle that. That is an example of a mechanism. So you will design these guidelines and calling policies, but then you have to take an extra active step to put in a framework to ensure the implementation actually works, so that it doesn't mean at face value do this and don't do that. It's so that it's not just a commandment, it's more of if this happens, this will happen, and this is who will do this. You have to an implementation mechanism needs to answer who that if something happens, who does what, where and how.
Can I jump in there? Because I think we're speaking theoretically.
Yes.
And what we're trying to establish is, as we have worked, all of the years that we have worked collectively, what have your experiences practically been in the workplace? When something goes wrong, an incident of this nature, what do you do? So she's shared the experience, which is brilliant, and it's one organization. So are we saying that that clarity is not there for most private sector organizations?
I can also clarify when I said that the procedures in my organization are very clear. Personally, I know them personally because in most of them I'm involved in coming up with them. For the majority of staff, and we are looking at about 1,000 plus staff, I can tell you they don't know. They are not aware. So what I've seen our HR do is at the point of joining, you sign a policy, right? God knows what you're thinking about at the point of joining. You're more thinking about the salary and the
Absolutely.
So then there are annual attestations whereby every financial year you are required now to, the first one was a physical signing. Subsequently, it comes online and you are given a week to, and there are very many policies. You are given like a week to reconfirm you have read the policies, all of them, the ones for what we're talking about and others, and you sign off. So there is a digital tracker. Someone can say, yes, Margaret signed, and if you don't, then you don't even have access to your emails. But again, do people really even, and nobody has ever been denied access to email. At least, you will be denied and then you quickly go and sign it. I've read, and you are put back on.
Yeah.
So what I've seen her implement now, which is an online kind of simulation, whereby she takes a particular policy using AI, then it's like a scenario and you sit for a short quiz at the end of that scenario thing. To test your understanding of the policy, and if you score below a certain grade, you have to redo it again. For me, what I've taken out from this forum is when I think of all the AI kind of simulations, none of them touch on gender violence. They're all on cyber security, fraud, anti-money laundering. So there's no priority that has been given to even like sexual harassment, because that makes you think you're not just now ticking, I've read and I agree. You are going through a whole policy simulated with animation, you're answering questions. So to be honest, I really, even with the best organizations, with the best policies, I don't think staff at ground level, even at high level, really know what's in most documents.
And I think that's the perception that I'm getting, because if we're to say here now, incident, we know the theory.
Yeah.
but what is my lived experience within the organization?
Capacity building is generally not prioritized in corporate culture in Kenya. And what you see in an organization that is not well organized, well structured, there's still an element of people don't know what to do by and why. So I think there needs to be a shift. We need to do better capacity building. I'll use an example of Sauti Salama, what we do done. We decided to combine corporate governance and all legal affairs, my department, with capacity building, because we realized a lot of legal issues that normally affect an organization, like being sued or there's compliance issues. There's a large sector of it. When it comes to the personnel, it's always a matter of workplace safety, fairness, enforcement, which comes about because people don't know what to do about it. That's why they'll turn to social media or they will take it for as long as they can. So if you combine those two, you'll get you'll not eradicate the problem entirely, but again you'll mitigate it to a very, very large extent. So if organizations can be more intentional with capacity building, it does not have to be a one-time thing. You can do quarterly or department by department, budget for it. It will actually, even financially, if you look at it, it will reduce a lot of costs that come up because people are the same.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you say budget for it, and because capacity building will come with a budget. And I think by and large, we then need to go back to the issue of leadership commitment to this issue. Because for a budget to be allocated for training on workplace violence, harassment, gender-based issues, means that the people who are signing off on that budget are walking the talk as well. Are they? Do they want that training?
So let me tell you, so this morning I had a meeting with my chairman, and he wanted a meeting in the afternoon, and I was like, no, I've got something I'm attending, something was happening in the afternoon, and he was like, oh, okay, what is it? And I said gender-based. Before I could even finish gender, I mean, Margaret, seriously, what gender issues do we have over here? I mean, you just want a free afternoon, right? And I was like, no, because it is an issue, and even if it is not an issue here, I can learn something that would help us tomorrow. It might be an issue. But you can see the mentality was that you are taking an afternoon to go and hear or contribute or read or do something about gender. So that budget allocation, I'll tell you for free. In corporate, if this was a paid for situation, me, I would not be here because they'd rather pay for me to go and learn about anti-money laundering, about what bill is coming out, where the money is coming from, right? This would really be down there in the priorities. So that's a factor. That's a factor. Really. There's no budget allocation to gender-based situations.
So having said that, and you were saying something about forward. So we keep saying we are reacting or responding. So often we're in organizations, we wait for the case first. Even when we all know manager so-and-so is doing X and Y and Z, we wait for that person who will eventually report for something to be done. What should the private sector be doing in terms of preventative steps to mitigate risk? What should they be doing? My pen has run out. You guys are talking so much. What should be done to prevent rather than to respond?
It's a bit hard to force that in the private sector because these are organizations with a very high level of autonomy. You can't compare a private limited company, a parastatal, because a parastatal, the government can just give a directive to influence what the organization's culture is. Now, forcing the hand of private individuals, because organizations are especially individuals, becomes a bit complicated because that means influencing the culture of these persons. So you have to be rather methodical about it. And I've come to notice the best way to get their ears is convince them it's affecting the profit numbers.
Absolutely.
So like for workplace this is not just a social issue. It's affecting your finances because you're spending this amount of money on litigation, on investigations, on all these things that are incidental to something you would have prevented if you did one or two trainings in area. So that means you still need to find people who understand finance. She mentioned she's an accountant, and you need to talk numbers to them. So for private individuals, talk numbers to them. For public figures, talk reputation to them. So find a way to talk with everybody in a language that they understand before finally we can eventually lift the stigma. Because if you mention gender-based, you will not finish that stigma. People will dismiss it and think,
Yeah.
people will be going again.
So that's part of what this research is about, so that we can quantify the cost to business. Because when you have that business case, then it starts to make sense to them. Why does it matter at all? Why should we be bothered? And it is all about the bottom line, as you say.
I think one thing also say in terms of the preventive measures would be being intentional, more intentional with culture shaping. I think I normally think, for example, when you take someone, for instance, who is in a Kenyan street and they will urinate along the road. Take that same person, put them in London, would they do the same? They wouldn't. So when we do a lot of leadership development, and one of the things we talk about is culture shaping. And culture shaping comes in two ways. One way is if a society puts the right measures that ensures rightness, or two, intentional building from childhood and even from training centers and even now entry levels into the corporate space. So if we would move and be more intentional in terms of culture shaping, for instance, my dad went to Stratton and he's an accountant. And one thing he says, he normally stresses a lot on integrity. And he says in Stratton we were taught that when you are an accountant, you are a steward of people's resources, God's resources. You have to be faithful. You see, that's culture ingrained in someone, and that person is passing it to me and to us. So I think culture shaping is also very, very important. As much as we have the systems and the structures that ensure rightness, it will go hand in hand and in collaboration with, are there also intentional efforts to be able to culture shape from schools, from universities, when people are being, going through all these courses, apart from the technical stuff. We have, proper, not just with these things like touching, when we were studying law, we were taught ethics and professionalism, but, was it really a hearty thing, something that, the school has given themselves into instilling the values, the virtues. And I think that's why I think even Kenya right now, we're at a place where even when we look at overall in the leadership, there is that need for virtue-based, value-based leadership. And I think what is also affecting, like even our corporate spaces, even in terms of this particular, thing that we talk about gender-based violence, it's ingrained deep in the culture of the people. And culture is formed, over the years and how someone has been trained. And this now also brings the aspect of the long game. As much as now temporarily we are putting the structures and the measures, strictly that ensure rightness, I think for even generations to come to be more intentional, to be able to make sure that these values and culture are, the place of mutual respect, the place of respecting the other gender, honor, such kind of thing, genuine love for people. I think it's important to be able to instill into people intentionally to bring them. You see, if you get an American, you get them and you get the arrogance in them being an American, because it is something that has been pumped into them since they were young. So cultures can be pumped, they believe in themselves, they believe they can go into anywhere, they believe they're the greatest country, because that thing was pumped into them while they were growing up. And I think that's also a very powerful way of now in the long term and the long run tackling this issue of gender-based violence. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on this?
I think the best way to make something effective is to have very perceivable consequences for not going and excluding all of it. somebody doing something like that, you will not just lose your job, you will actually answer for your actions in court. That is something that will instill a certain fear in other people, not just within the organization, but again to shape the culture like he's spoken with. So if we can make sure that we can make things manage very, very specific in terms of consequences, I think we'll take a few steps for it.
We spoke earlier on about the business case. And I wanted to just get a sense, when you think about it, what ways do you think gender-based violence and harassment affect workplace productivity, maybe morale, talent retention? Kenya is estimated to lose about 1.1% of GDP on account of gender-based violence, which is quite significant. And so now we're trying to make this apply not just to GDP, but to the private sector. So what are some of the immediate ways that you think that private sector is impacted?
To arrive at this figure that we're using, what are the plot points that we used to arrive at it?
So this research is publicly available, and this is not our research. So I can't give you the parameters for it. But what I can give you parameters for is on the private sector, which we've done in South Africa before. So the costs end up being in South Africa about 36 billion rand minimum per annum, lost on account of gender-based violence. And factors include litigation costs, because that invariably companies end up having to spend on that. It includes things like healthcare costs. Many companies pay the insurance premiums for health, so those end up skyrocketing because people are having to keep being hospitalized for treatment of issues to do with gender-based violence. Things like productivity, when you look at the workplace, productivity is impacted. We were talking about how even if it's domestic violence, I am unable to concentrate properly, I have absenteeism, I'm missing a lot of work. Presenteeism, I'm there, but I'm not really functioning. Talent acquisition, if these cases are known, I mean, if you look at Nestle at the moment with that very public situation with their CEO, and if you think about how determined and opinionated our Gen Zers are, for them, they're like, Nestle is not a place I want to work. Turnover. Some people vote with their feet, so they'll leave because of the victimization that they're going through. And when they do, does it not cost you more as an organization to replace, to go through that recruitment process again and hire resources? Product boycott.
Yeah, and Travis boycott. We are very, so insurance is categorized as a financial services, as a financial services sector. So perception, very important, when you think of financial services, you think of banks, and you can't have anything funny going on in a bank. I mean, people would have their monies elsewhere. So insurance is kind of like the distant cousin of banks, and we try and hold ourselves to the same standard. And we do find there's a lot of competition. So when you have these things happening in the organization, there is a tendency for even the competitors to say, why are you taking a cover you had? In fact, there that turnover is so high, you don't know who the service is tomorrow. We are more stable. So in our sense, I think we would categorize if we were to look at the quantum of what it would cost, then you are losing business. And when you put in the business loss, the figures can go pretty higher. And sometimes people want to give business to organization A, not because it's any better than organization B, but they have vested interests over there. So anything, they will just latch on to anything. Oh, I know a secretary who's being harassed by immediately. The business. So there you quantify, and you've lost business.
It makes me think of even just the issue of morale, because sometimes you think it's just the victim who's affected. But oftentimes many of us are bystanders, and you're seeing this happening, and you're seeing that it's the leadership that is perpetrating. And so it can actually affect team morale as a whole, and thus team productivity. People are now just going to work to tick a box, but they're no longer as convicted about the work that you're doing. Any other thoughts on how business is impacted?
I think what I was supposed to add, I think it's about now also the clientele, where if, for example, I'm working in a particular space and I feel even, they're asking towards me, and also you're seeing, for example, how this person is even now, asking a client. The way you're speaking to your employees, you want to speak to your client. So what I would do, I would not, refer a client to come to that particular, organization, get that particular service. I think that's what has happened before in a law firm where I was. You heard how a client has been spoken to, and then that one sometimes happens in a way. A client can be in the office, and then a client hears the way you've spoken to a junior. And I think that what transpired in a number of times. There's some clients who are coming to the office, and then they are hearing how the boss is speaking to the juniors, until a particular client started to speak to the staff members who are advocates the same way the boss speaks to them. So you see, that one a bit affects how you do business with people. And now I know that even if I have someone who needs the service that we're offering, I'd rather just let them, get the service elsewhere, because I know even how they're going to be treated and such. Yeah.
Can we talk about the support that is offered to victims? What support mechanisms do we currently have in the private sector or in organizations in South Africa? How are we supporting victims?
Organizations generally have used to this issue. They're not really out to protect the victims, to protect themselves.
They're not really?
Out to protect the victim. It's usually how can they keep themselves, keep their reputation intact, reduce the costs if any kind. It's never about supporting the victims, making the situation worry.
So there's more interest in protecting the reputation of the organization than there is in
Making the
supporting victims.
Tokenism. Is that the word? I totally agree. Where whatever initiatives are put in place, corporate comes first, right? And if the victim benefits or there's an advantage out of that, and let me not just generalize, but that's majorly where we tend to go. Although corporates then have really gone quite the distance, I would say we have, for us, we have a counseling hotline, and it's not just that you are victimized, or you are feeling a certain way, you call it is free, but then, I don't know how much it's utilized or whatever, but it's something that they charge and say they want to talk, especially with this generation of mental health issues. They are really encouraged.
Why?
I don't need to relate to it. It's just that I just wonder, some of us, maybe we didn't know that's what it was called, mental health. So you got mental health and you dealt. These days people are, they're educated. Mental health, you don't have to deal, get coping mechanisms, you can get help from outside. So to answer your question, yes, a number of corporates that I know, and these are almost, there's nothing unique, it's just,
knowing what your peers are doing and trying to